Captain Jake Morrison wiped the frost from his helmet visor and stared at the wreckage before him. The alien ship had crashed hard into the ice, leaving a deep scar across the frozen moon's surface. Metal pieces lay scattered everywhere, half buried in snow that never melted. His ship's computer had picked up a weak distress signal 3 hours ago, and Jake had followed it to this desolate place. He had been exploring space for 15 years, mapping new systems and searching for valuable minerals. In all that time, he had seen many strange things: dead ships, abandoned stations, even the remains of civilizations that had disappeared long ago. But this felt different somehow. The crash was recent, maybe 3 or 4 weeks old. The metal still looked fresh where it had torn through the ice. Jake moved closer, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. The ship's design was unlike anything he had seen before. It was huge, easily 3 times the size of his own vessel. The hull was made of dark red metal that seemed to drink in the light from his helmet lamps. Strange symbols covered the outer walls, probably writing in some alien language he didn't know. The airlock was damaged but still functional. Jake forced it open with his emergency tools and stepped inside. The corridor beyond was dark and cold. His breath formed clouds in the freezing air. He turned on his lights and began to explore. Bodies lay everywhere. The crew had been large, maybe 40 or 50 individuals. They were tall, much taller than any human, with bodies covered in dark scales. Their faces were long and sharp with powerful jaws full of teeth. Even dead, they looked dangerous. Jake had never seen this species before. He took pictures with his suit's camera, knowing that the Universal Coalition would want to study everything. He moved through the ship slowly, checking each room. The crew had died quickly when the crash happened. Most of them probably never knew what hit them. Jake felt a wave of sadness wash over him. These were people with lives and families just like humans. Now they were gone, frozen in this lonely place. Jake was about to leave when he heard something. A small sound barely louder than a whisper. He stopped and listened. There it was again. A whimper, weak and scared. He followed the sound to a sealed door near the back of the ship. The door had been reinforced, protected with extra metal plates. Someone had tried very hard to keep this room safe. He forced the door open and looked inside. In the corner, wrapped in a thick thermal blanket, was a small creature. It was tiny compared to the adult bodies he had seen, no bigger than a house cat. Its scales were light-colored, almost see-through, and its eyes were wide with fear. This was a child, a baby of whatever species had crewed this ship. The moment the creature saw Jake, it hissed and pressed itself against the wall. Its mouth opened to show rows of sharp little teeth, but Jake could see that it was weak and starving. The food supplies in the room were almost gone. The creature had been alone here for weeks, waiting to die. Jake's heart ached. He knew what it felt like to be alone and scared. When he was 17, his younger brother Daniel had died in an accident. Jake had spent years blaming himself, wishing he could have done something to save him. He looked at this terrified little creature and knew he couldn't walk away. He turned on his suit's external speakers so the creature could hear him. His voice came out gentle and calm. "Hey there, little one. I'm not going to hurt you. I promise." The creature didn't understand the words, but it seemed to recognize the tone. Its hissing stopped, though it still watched him with suspicious eyes. Jake slowly reached into his supply pack and pulled out a food bar. He didn't know what this species ate, but hunger often made creatures less picky. He broke off a small piece and slid it across the floor. The creature stared at the food, then at Jake, then back at the food. It was clearly starving, but also terrified. Finally, hunger won. It darted forward, grabbed the food, and retreated to its corner. Jake watched as it ate, making small happy sounds as it chewed. "That's it," Jake said softly. "You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you." He spent the next hour slowly gaining the creature's trust. He gave it more food piece by piece, each time moving a little closer. The creature watched him constantly but stopped trying to hide. Eventually, Jake was able to reach out and touch its head. The scales felt warm and smooth under his gloved hand. The creature leaned into the touch, clearly desperate for comfort. Jake looked around the room and felt his throat tighten. Whoever had sealed this child in here had loved them very much. They had given the child all the food and blankets they could spare. They had reinforced the door to protect them from the crash. In their final moments, they had tried to save their baby. "Your family loved you," Jake whispered. "They did everything they could." He made his decision then. He couldn't leave this child here to die alone in the cold. It didn't matter that they were different species. It didn't matter that he knew nothing about caring for alien children. This was someone's baby and they needed help. "You're coming with me," Jake said. "I'll take care of you. I promise." He carefully wrapped the creature in the thermal blanket and picked it up. It was surprisingly light, all skin and bones from weeks of barely eating. It made a small scared sound but didn't fight him. Jake held it close to his chest where it could feel the warmth of his suit's heating system. As he carried the child back through the dead ship, Jake looked at the bodies one last time. He wished he could bury them properly, but the frozen ground made that impossible. The best he could do was document everything and report it to the coalition. Maybe someday someone would come back and honor these people properly. "I'll take care of your child," Jake promised the empty corridors. "I'll keep them safe. I swear it." He stepped out of the ship and into the frozen wasteland. His own ship, the Wanderer, waited in the distance. The small creature pressed against his chest, making soft sounds that might have been crying. Jake held it tighter and began the long walk back. He didn't know it then, but this moment would change everything. Not just for him, not just for this child, but for the entire galaxy. Because sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest acts of kindness. And sometimes saving one life can save millions more. Jake Morrison had found an abandoned child on a frozen moon. He had chosen compassion over convenience. And the universe would never forget what happened next. The first week on the Wanderer was difficult. Jake had set up a safe space in the cargo bay for the small creature, with blankets and cushions to make it comfortable. But the child refused to come out from behind the storage containers. Whenever Jake approached, it would hiss and bare its teeth. The sounds it made were threatening, but Jake could see the fear behind them. Jake decided to call the child Danny after his late brother. He knew it probably had a real name in its own language, but for now Danny would do. It felt right somehow, giving this scared little one the name of someone he had loved. Every day Jake brought food to the cargo bay and sat on the floor a safe distance away. He would eat his own meal and talk, even though Danny couldn't understand him. It didn't matter. Jake just wanted Danny to get used to his voice, to learn that he wasn't a threat. "I had a brother named Daniel," Jake said one evening, chewing on synthesized beef. "Everyone called him Danny. He was 3 years younger than me. Always getting into trouble, that kid. He died when he was 14, fell through thin ice while we were skating. I tried to save him, but I wasn't fast enough." Danny watched from the shadows, those big eyes reflecting the cargo bay lights. Jake pretended not to notice. "I think about him every day," Jake continued. "Wonder what kind of man he would have become. He was always kind, you know? Always bringing home stray animals. Mom used to get so mad. But Danny couldn't stand to see anything suffer." Days passed like this. Jake would work on his ship's systems, run his exploration programs, and spend his free time in the cargo bay talking to Danny. Slowly, very slowly, the child began to move closer. First just a meter or two, then close enough that Jake could see the details of his scales. They were beautiful, really, light purple with hints of silver, much paler than the dark scales of the adult crew. Jake started researching, using every database he could access through his long-range communications. It took time, but eventually he found information about the species. They were called the Creventhi, from a world called Scarath. The files were marked as restricted, which meant they were considered potentially dangerous. Reading through the reports, Jake learned that the Creventhi were warriors. Their entire society was built around strength and honor. They came from a high-gravity planet and were natural predators. They had never responded to any coalition attempts at communication. Most xenologists believed they considered other species beneath them, but the reports also mentioned something important. Creventhi family bonds were incredibly strong. Leaving a child to die would be considered the worst possible dishonor. The crew of that crashed ship must have been desperate, running from something terrible to have ended up so far from their own space. Armed with this knowledge, Jake changed his approach. The Creventhi respected strength but also recognized loyalty. He stopped trying to coax Danny out with gentle words. Instead, he began treating Danny like an equal, someone worthy of respect rather than pity. "Listen, Danny," Jake said one evening, looking directly at the child. "I know you're scared. I know I'm not like you, but I saved you, and that means something. In my culture, that makes us family. Family takes care of each other. So you can keep hiding in the shadows or you can trust me. Your choice." Something shifted in Danny's eyes. The next day, the child came out from hiding and sat just a meter away while Jake ate. It was progress. Weeks passed. Danny grew bolder, venturing closer, even taking food directly from Jake's hand. The child was smart, incredibly smart. Jake started teaching him words, pointing at objects and naming them. Water, food, ship. Danny would tilt his head and try to repeat the sounds. They came out strange and hissing, but Jake understood. Then came the night that changed everything. Jake had been working for 18 hours straight, fixing a problem with the ship's navigation system. He was exhausted. He stumbled into the cargo bay, intending to check on Danny before bed, but he never made it. He fell asleep on the floor, too tired to move. When he woke up hours later, something was pressed against his side. Danny had curled up next to him, the child's small body rising and falling with each breath. When Danny's eyes opened and met Jake's, there was no fear anymore, only trust. From that moment, they were truly bonded. Danny followed Jake everywhere, learning how the ship worked and trying to help. The child's coordination was remarkable. Those clawed hands could manipulate tools with surprising skill. Jake started giving Danny simple tasks, and the child performed them perfectly. Jake also learned about Danny's diet. The Creventhi were carnivores, obligate predators who needed meat to survive. Jake's synthesizer could produce it, though Danny clearly preferred raw meat to cooked. Jake didn't mind. He just wanted Danny to be healthy and happy. 3 months after the rescue, Danny had grown significantly. The child was now the size of a large dog with stronger muscles and darker scales. But more importantly, Danny had learned to communicate. Not with words yet, but with gestures and expressions that Jake understood perfectly. When Danny was happy, his tail would swish back and forth. When confused, his head would tilt to the side. When scared, he would press close to Jake's leg. Jake taught Danny games. Chase and hide and seek were favorites. Danny would race through the ship's corridors, making happy chirping sounds that echoed off the walls. During these moments, Jake could forget that Danny was an alien predator from a warrior species. He was just a kid having fun, but reality couldn't be ignored forever. Jake's ship was still 6 months away from the nearest coalition station. When they arrived, there would be questions. Officials would want to study Danny, maybe even take him away. The thought filled Jake with a cold dread. Danny was his son now in every way that mattered. The idea of losing him was unbearable. One night, Jake held Danny close and made a promise. The child was almost too big to fit in his lap now, but tried anyway, seeking the comfort of physical contact. "I won't let them take you," Jake whispered, running his hand over Danny's scales. "I don't care what they say or what rules they have. You're mine and I'm yours. Family doesn't abandon family. Not ever." Danny made a soft rumbling sound like a cat's purr, but deeper. The child understood the emotion, even if not all the words. Jake had become his entire world, the one constant in a life that had been torn apart by tragedy. Jake continued teaching. He showed Danny how to read, starting with simple picture books he had stored in the ship's computer. Danny absorbed everything like a sponge. Within weeks, the child could recognize dozens of words. Jake also taught him about human culture, about Earth and its many different peoples, about music and art and all the things that made humanity special. In return, Danny taught Jake about Creventhi body language, the way a tail position indicated mood, how the angle of the head crest showed respect or challenge, the subtle sounds that meant different things. They were building a bridge between their species, creating a language that belonged only to them. As the months passed and the coalition station drew nearer, Jake felt his anxiety grow. He had filled out all the required reports, documented everything about the rescue and Danny's care. He had followed every protocol, but he knew that wouldn't be enough. The coalition would see Danny as a political opportunity, a chance to make contact with the mysterious Creventhi Empire. They would take him away and Jake would be powerless to stop them, unless he wasn't alone. Jake began sending coded messages to old friends, people he trusted. He started making plans, and backup plans for the backup plans. If the coalition tried to separate them, he would fight. Not with weapons, but with lawyers and public opinion and every tool at his disposal. Because Danny wasn't just an alien he had rescued. Danny was his son, and Jake Morrison would move heaven and earth to keep his family together. The coalition station Frontier 7 appeared on the view screen like a massive flower of metal and glass. It was one of the largest stations on the edge of explored space, home to over 10,000 people. Jake's stomach twisted with worry as he guided the wanderer toward the docking bay. Danny stood beside him, now as tall as Jake's waist, watching everything with curious eyes. Remember what we practiced, Jake said softly. Stay calm, be polite. Don't show your teeth unless you're smiling. Danny made a soft clicking sound that meant he understood. The child had learned so much in the past 6 months. He could understand most of what Jake said now, though speaking human words was still difficult. His mouth and throat just weren't shaped right for it. The docking procedure took an hour. When it was complete, Jake and Danny were met by a security team. The guards' hands stayed near their weapons, and Jake felt anger flash through him. Danny noticed too. The child pressed closer to Jake's side, not in fear but in protection. It's okay, Jake murmured. They're just scared. They don't know you like I do. Commander Lisa Hayes was waiting in the main conference room. She was a tall woman with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She smiled when she saw them, but Jake noticed how her eyes kept moving to Danny, studying him. Captain Morrison, welcome to Frontier 7, and this must be your young friend. This is Danny, Jake said firmly. He's under my care and protection. Lisa nodded slowly. Of course. Please sit. We have much to discuss. The meeting lasted for hours. Jake showed her everything. The footage from the crashed ship. The records of Danny's growth and development. The research he had done on the Creventhi species. Lisa listened carefully, asking questions and taking notes. This is quite remarkable, she said finally. The Creventhi have been a complete mystery to us. They ignore our messages, destroy our probes, and generally act like we don't exist. And here you are with one of their children. What happens to Danny now? Jake asked. His voice was steady, but his hands were clenched under the table. We have to try to return him to his people. Surely you understand that. And if they don't want him? Jake's words came out harsh. The Creventhi have strict honor codes. That entire crew died out there. What if Danny is considered tainted by that failure? What if they reject him? Lisa's expression softened. We can't make assumptions. But I understand your concern. You've bonded with him. He's become family to you. He is family, Jake corrected. Not become is. Over the next 2 weeks, Jake and Danny were kept in a comfortable but isolated section of the station. They could move around freely, but guards always followed at a distance. Jake hated it, but he understood. The Coalition was nervous about having a Creventhi on board, even a young one. Danny handled it well. He was curious about everything, wanting to explore every corner of the station. Jake took him to the observation deck where they could watch ships coming and going. He took him to the gardens where real plants grew under artificial sunlight. Danny loved the gardens, fascinated by the flowers and trees that were so different from anything on his home world. Meanwhile, the Coalition sent messages to the Creventhi Empire. Each one included full documentation of the crash, Danny's rescue, and an offer to return him safely. Each message went unanswered. Days passed with only silence. Then, on the 15th day, everything changed. Alarms blared throughout the station. Jake grabbed Danny and ran to the nearest view screen. What he saw made his blood run cold. A Creventhi warship had appeared at the edge of the system. It was enormous, easily 5 times the size of the station itself. The hull was the same dark red metal as the crashed ship, but this vessel was alive with power. Lights pulsed along its surface like a heartbeat. The message that followed was brief and cold. Return the hatchling. He must not be harmed. We arrive in 3 days. The station erupted into chaos. The Creventhi had never come this deep into Coalition space before. No one knew if they were coming in peace or preparing for war. More Coalition ships were called in. Defense systems came online. Diplomats worked frantically to prepare for first contact with a species that had ignored humanity for decades. Jake spent those 3 days with Danny, knowing they might be his last with the child he loved. They played together in the quarters. Jake read him stories. He taught Danny more words and listened to Danny's attempts at human speech. The child was getting better at it, though his voice was still rough and growling. On the second night, Jake tried to explain what was happening. Your people are coming for you, he said, sitting on the floor with Danny's head in his lap. Your real family. They're going to take you home. Danny looked up at him with those intelligent eyes. Then slowly and carefully the child spoke. The word was rough and barely recognizable, but Jake understood it perfectly. Da. Jake's eyes filled with tears. Yeah, kiddo. I'm your da, and I always will be no matter where you go or who you're with. You're my son. Nothing will ever change that. Danny made the purring sound that meant contentment and happiness. but Jake could see the worry in the child's eyes. Danny didn't want to leave either. The third day arrived. The Creventhi warship docked with the station using a temporary airlock designed for the occasion. Jake and Danny waited in the main conference room with Commander Hayes and her diplomatic team. Everyone was nervous. Armed guards lined the walls, though Jake doubted their weapons would do much against a species that could tear through steel with their bare hands. The door opened. The Creventhi who entered were like nothing Jake had imagined. They were massive, easily 8 or 9 feet tall, covered in scales so dark they looked black. They wore armor made of the same red metal as their ships, decorated with symbols that probably indicated rank and achievements. They moved with a predatory grace that made Jake's instincts scream danger. The leader was the largest of them all. His scales were marked with silver scars, and his eyes were the color of molten gold. He stopped when he saw Danny, and something flickered across his face. Then, to everyone's shock, he dropped to one knee. Every warrior with him did the same. Prince Derek, the leader's voice, was a deep rumble. He spoke in perfect human standard, with barely an accent. "We thought you lost. Your father grieves every moment you are gone." Prince. The word hit Jake like a physical blow. Danny wasn't just any Creventhi child. He was royalty. The crashed ship had been carrying the Emperor's own son. Danny seemed confused by the display. The child pressed against Jake's leg, seeking comfort in the familiar. The leader's golden eyes shifted to Jake, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "You are the human who saved Prince Derek?" "Yes," Jake said, keeping his voice steady. "I found him in the wreckage. He was alone and starving. I did what anyone should do. I took care of him." The leader rose to his full height. Jake had to tilt his head back to meet those eyes. "I am Lord Commander Kreth. I lead the Emperor's military forces. You did what we could not do. You saved our prince when we failed. This debt cannot be measured." "I didn't do it for a reward," Jake said. "I did it because it was right. Because he needed help." Something changed in Kreth's expression. "You fed him? Gave him shelter? Protected him?" "Yes, and I'd do it again. 1,000 times over." Kreth studied Jake for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He placed his massive hand over his heart in what was clearly a gesture of respect. "The Creventhi have many laws, human, but the oldest and most sacred is this. A life debt must be honored. You saved our prince. You became kin to him when we could not reach him. This is blood bond. It cannot be broken." Jake's heart pounded. "What does that mean?" "It means you are clan now." "It means Prince Derek has 2 fathers, one by birth and one by bond. It means the Creventhi will never forget what you have done." The implications of Kreth's words spread through the room like ripples in water. Commander Hayes looked stunned. Her diplomatic team whispered frantically to each other. The guards gripped their weapons tighter, though they kept them pointed at the floor. Everyone understood that something huge had just happened, something that would change the relationship between humanity and the Creventhi forever. Jake didn't care about any of that. He only cared about one thing. "I want to stay with Danny," he said, looking directly at Kreth. "If you're taking him back to your empire, I'm coming too. He's just a kid. He needs someone he knows and trusts." The Creventhi warriors behind Kreth stirred, clearly shocked. One of them stepped forward, anger flashing in his eyes. "You dare make demands? You are nothing but a soft-skinned, weak and fragile. You have no right to—" "Silence." Kreth's voice cracked like a whip. The warrior immediately stepped back, bowing his head. Kreth turned back to Jake. "You would come to Scarath? Our world is not like yours. The gravity is harsh. The air is thin. Our ways are built on strength and combat. You would suffer there." "I don't care," Jake said simply. "Danny needs me. That's all that matters." Kreth studied him for several long seconds. Then, incredibly, the corner of his mouth turned up slightly. It might have been a smile. "You have the heart of a warrior, human. Very well, you will accompany us. The Emperor will want to meet the one who saved his son." The next few hours passed in a blur. Jake packed his belongings while Danny stayed close to his side. The child seemed worried, unsure about the changes happening around him. Jake tried to reassure him, but he was worried too. He was about to leave behind everything he knew to travel to an alien world with people who, just days ago, had been considered potentially hostile. Commander Hayes pulled him aside before he left. "Are you sure about this, Captain? We don't know what will happen to you there. The Creventhi might see you as a curiosity or worse, an insult. Their culture is completely different from ours." "Danny is my son," Jake said firmly. "I'm not letting him go alone." Whatever happens, we face it together. Lisa nodded slowly. Then I wish you luck. And Captain, what you've done here, it's remarkable. You might have just opened the door to peace between our peoples. That's not a small thing. Jake hadn't thought about it that way. He'd just been trying to save a scared child. But as he followed Kreth and the Kreventhi warriors onto their massive warship, he began to understand the bigger picture. First contact with an alien species, achieved not through military might or diplomatic negotiation, but through simple compassion. The Kreventhi ship was unlike anything Jake had experienced. Everything was larger, built for beings much bigger than humans. The gravity was higher too, making each step an effort. Jake's legs ached after just a few minutes of walking. Kreth noticed his struggle and slowed the pace. The gravity will get easier, the Lord Commander said. Your body will adapt, or it will break you. We shall see. It wasn't a threat, just a statement of fact. The Kreventhi way was harsh, testing everyone constantly. Jake gritted his teeth and kept walking. He wouldn't show weakness, not here, not in front of these warriors. Danny stayed close to Jake, but the child's attention kept drifting to the other Kreventhi. It was clear that seeing his own kind again was affecting him. He moved differently around them, his posture changing to match theirs. His tail held at a specific angle that Jake had never seen before. This was Danny's culture, his true heritage, and Jake could see the child trying to remember what had been forgotten. They were given quarters near the ship's center. The room was large but sparse, with sleeping platforms that were too big, and furniture that wasn't designed for human proportions. Jake didn't complain. He set up a space for himself and Danny, using blankets and cushions to make it more comfortable. That night, as they prepared to sleep, Danny seemed troubled. The child kept making small distressed sounds, torn between two worlds. Jake held him close. It's okay to be confused, Jake whispered. You're Kreventhi. This is your people, your culture. But you're also part of me now. You can be both. You don't have to choose. Danny relaxed slightly, soothed by Jake's voice and presence. But Jake knew the real challenges were still ahead. They were traveling to Skarath, the Kreventhi homeworld. There Danny would meet his birth father, the Emperor. There Jake would be tested in ways he couldn't imagine. The journey took 5 days. During that time, Jake learned about Kreventhi culture from Kreth. The Lord Commander seemed genuinely interested in the human who had saved the prince. They would sit in the observation deck watching the stars streak past, and Kreth would explain his people's ways. We are warriors, Kreth said. It is what we are bred for, what we live for. Strength is everything. Weakness is death. But strength comes in many forms. Physical power, yes, but also loyalty, honor, the courage to stand against impossible odds. Like raising an alien child? Jake asked. Kreth's smile was fierce. Exactly like that. You faced the unknown. You chose compassion when abandonment would have been easier. That is a warrior's heart, regardless of your weak human body. Jake learned about the Kreventhi clan system, their complex honor codes, and their history of conquest. The Empire spanned dozens of star systems, each one taken through military might. Other species either joined the Empire willingly or were crushed. There was no middle ground. What about species that can't fight? Jake asked. What about people who are naturally peaceful? Kreth's expression darkened. They serve or they die. It is the way of things. Jake felt sick. This was the culture Danny would grow up in. A culture built on violence and domination. But he couldn't judge them too harshly. Humanity had its own dark history of war and conquest. Maybe every species had to find its own path to peace. Danny spent time with the other Kreventhi, learning their language and customs. The child was a quick learner, absorbing everything like a sponge. But every night Danny would return to Jake, seeking comfort and reassurance. The bond between them hadn't weakened. If anything, it had grown stronger. On the 5th day, they arrived at Skarath. The planet was beautiful and terrible at the same time. It was covered in red deserts and black mountains with cities carved directly into living rock. The gravity was crushing, almost twice what Jake was used to. Just standing upright took all his strength. Kreth noticed his struggle. If you cannot adapt, you will die here. The weak do not survive on Skarath. Then I'll get strong, Jake said through gritted teeth. Whatever it takes. The city they landed in was called Kraventhar, the capital of the Empire. It was massive, home to millions of Kreventhi. The buildings were works of art, decorated with carvings that depicted famous battles and great warriors. Everywhere Jake looked, he saw strength and power on display. They were taken to the Imperial Palace, a fortress that rose from the mountain itself. Inside, the halls were lined with warriors, each one watching Jake with curious or hostile eyes. He was the first human to ever walk these halls. Some saw him as a hero who saved their prince. Others saw him as a weak alien who had no business being there. Finally, they reached the throne room. It was enormous, with a ceiling so high Jake couldn't see it in the dim light. At the far end, on a throne made of black stone, sat Emperor Valtrek. The Emperor was ancient by Creventhi standards. His scales had faded from black to gray, and his movements were slower than the younger warriors. But his eyes held the weight of centuries, and power radiated from him like heat from a fire. When those eyes fell on Danny, they blazed with emotion. "My son," Valtrek's voice cracked. He rose from his throne and descended the steps, his movements careful but determined. When he reached Danny, he gathered the child into his arms. "My son, I thought you lost forever." Danny hesitated for only a moment before pressing against his birth father. Instinct recognized instinct. This was pack, this was clan, this was blood. Jake watched, his heart aching with a complex mix of emotions. He was happy that Danny had found his true family, but he was also terrified of losing the child he loved. Then Valtrek's eyes turned to Jake. The Emperor studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You are the human, the one who saved my greatest treasure." Jake bowed, unsure of the proper protocol. "Yes, Your Majesty. I'm Jake Morrison." "Captain Morrison," Valtrek corrected gently. "Lord Commander Kreth has told me everything. You found my son when he was dying. You fed him, sheltered him, loved him. You became father to him when I could not reach him." The Emperor placed a heavy hand on Jake's shoulder. Despite his age, his grip was strong enough to make Jake wince. Emperor Valtrek's hand remained on Jake's shoulder as he spoke. The weight of it was considerable, both physically and symbolically. The entire throne room had gone silent. Hundreds of Creventhi warriors watching this moment with intense interest. "In our culture, this makes you clan," Valtrek said slowly. "It makes you Creventhi regardless of your birth. You saved my son when I could not. You gave him love when he was alone and afraid. This debt can never be repaid." Jake found his voice. "I don't want payment, Your Majesty. I just want to be part of Danny's life. He's my son too in every way that matters." Something flickered in the Emperor's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. "Derek," he corrected gently. "His true name is Derek, but I understand he has become Danny to you. Very well. He may carry both names as he now carries two fathers." Valtrek addressed the assembled warriors. His voice carried through the massive hall with ease. "Let it be known throughout the Empire. This human, Jake Morrison, is to be treated as clan. He is father to Prince Derek by bond, if not by blood. Any who harm him harm the Imperial family. Any who dishonor him dishonor me." The declaration sent ripples through the crowd. Some warriors bowed their heads in acceptance. Others looked angry or confused. But none dared speak against the Emperor's decree. The following days were exhausting. Jake was given quarters in the palace, rooms that were luxurious by Creventhi standards but uncomfortable for a human. The furniture was too large, the gravity too heavy, the air too thin. His body ached constantly as it tried to adapt. But he refused to complain or show weakness. These were Danny's people, and he would prove himself worthy of their respect. Danny, now called Derek by the Creventhi, was enrolled in the traditional training program for young warriors. It was harsh. Far harsher than anything Jake would have allowed. The children were taught to fight from dawn until dusk, learning weapons and combat techniques that would serve them their entire lives. They were pushed to their limits and beyond, taught that weakness meant death. Jake watched the training sessions with growing concern. Derek was smaller than the other children, having spent critical development months eating human food and living in lower gravity. The other young Creventhi took advantage of this, challenging him constantly, testing him. Some of the fights left Derek with cuts and bruises, but the child never backed down, never quit, driven by a fierce determination to prove himself. One evening, Derek returned to their quarters limping badly. A larger child had injured his leg during combat practice. Jake immediately wanted to get medical help, but Derek refused. "Warriors endure pain," the child said in halting human standard. His voice had gotten deeper, more growling. "Cannot show weakness." "You're not weak," Jake said firmly, examining the injury anyway. "You're brave. There's a difference between being brave and being stupid. Let me help you." Reluctantly, Derek allowed Jake to treat the wound. As Jake worked, carefully cleaning and bandaging the injury, he thought about the two different worlds his son was trying to navigate. The Creventhi world of strength and combat, and the human world of compassion and care. "You know," Jake said softly, "being strong doesn't mean you can't accept help. The strongest people I've ever known were the ones who knew when to ask for support." Derek considered this. "Father Valtrek says warriors stand alone. And I say family stands together," Jake countered. "You have two fathers now, kiddo. Two different perspectives. You get to choose which wisdom applies when." Over the months that followed, Jake slowly adapted to life on Scarath. The gravity became easier to bear as his muscles strengthened. He learned the Creventhi language, though his pronunciation was terrible and often made Derek laugh. He studied their customs and history, trying to understand these people who had become his family. He also began teaching. Several young Creventhi showed interest in the strange human and his different ways. Jake started sharing human stories, human ideas about honor and strength. He taught them that compassion could be powerful, that protecting the weak was a sign of true strength, not weakness. Not everyone appreciated his teachings. Some of the older warriors saw him as a corrupting influence, making the young ones soft. There were challenges, formal duels where Jake was expected to fight Creventhi warriors in physical combat. He lost every single one. His human body simply no match for Creventhi strength and speed. But he never gave up. He never ran. And that, surprisingly, earned him respect. The Creventhi valued courage above all else, and Jake had courage in abundance. After each defeat, he would rise, bow to his opponent, and thank them for the lesson. Slowly, grudgingly, the warriors began to accept him. Emperor Valtrek watched all of this with interest. He and Jake developed an unexpected friendship, two fathers bound by their love for the same child. They would sit together in the palace gardens watching Derek train and talk about life and leadership. "I was wrong about humans," Valtrek admitted one day. "We thought you were weak because you value peace over war. We thought you were cowardly because you negotiate instead of conquer. But you have shown me a different kind of strength. And you've shown me that strength doesn't have to mean cruelty." Jake replied, "Your people are warriors, yes. But they're also loyal, honorable, and protective of their own. There's beauty in that." The real test came 2 years after Jake's arrival on Scarath. A rival clan challenged the Emperor's rule, claiming that allowing a human into the imperial family was a sign of weakness. They demanded trial by combat, an ancient tradition where disputes were settled through battle. Emperor Valtrek was old, his fighting days long past. Normally he would send a champion to fight in his place. But the challenger demanded that either Valtrek fight personally, or that Jake, as clan, fight to defend the family's honor. It was a clever trap. If Jake refused to fight, he would prove the challenger's point about human weakness. If he fought and lost, the result would be the same. And everyone knew he would lose. A human couldn't possibly defeat a Creventhi warrior in their prime. Jake accepted the challenge immediately. The fight was scheduled for the next full moon, giving Jake time to prepare. Derek was beside himself with worry. "You cannot win, the young Creventhi said, now tall enough to look Jake in the eye. "You will die." "Maybe," Jake agreed. "But I have to try. This is about more than just me. It's about showing your people that humans don't back down from challenges, that we face our fears head-on." He trained harder than he ever had in his life. Kreth himself oversaw the training, teaching Jake every trick and technique that might give him even a small advantage. The Lord Commander was pessimistic about Jake's chances, but respected his determination. The day of the fight arrived. The arena was packed with thousands of Creventhi, all eager to see the human either prove himself or fail spectacularly. Jake stood in the center of the fighting pit, wearing light armor that barely seemed adequate. His opponent, a massive warrior named Thrak, grinned at him with savage anticipation. The fight began. Thrak was faster, stronger, and more skilled than Jake could ever hope to be. Within seconds, Jake was bleeding from a dozen cuts. The crowd roared its approval, enjoying the spectacle. But Jake didn't give up. Every time Thrak knocked him down, he got back up. Every time he was wounded, he kept fighting. He couldn't win through strength, so he used cunning. He studied Thrak's patterns, looking for any weakness. He used his smaller size to his advantage, dodging under attacks that would have killed him. He fought dirty when he had to, using techniques the honorable Creventhi would never consider. The fight lasted over an hour. Jake was exhausted, battered, barely able to stand. Thrak was tired too, frustrated by this human who refused to stay down. In a moment of anger, the warrior overextended on an attack. Jake saw his chance. He dodged to the side and struck at Thrak's knee with every ounce of strength he had left. The joint buckled. Thrak stumbled, and Jake, using the last of his energy, drove his blade into a weak point in the warrior's armor. It wasn't a killing blow, but it was enough. Thrak fell, unable to continue. The arena went silent. Then, impossibly, the Creventhi began to cheer. Jake had won. A human had defeated a Creventhi warrior in single combat. It shouldn't have been possible, but he had done it through sheer determination and refusal to quit. Jake collapsed, his vision fading. The last thing he saw was Derek running toward him, calling his name. He woke up 3 days later in the palace medical facility. Emperor Valtrek sat beside his bed, looking older and more tired than ever. "You nearly died," the Emperor said quietly. "The healers weren't sure you would survive." "But I did," Jake managed to say through cracked lips. "And I won." "Yes, you won." Valtrek smiled, a rare expression. "You have done something remarkable, Jake Morrison. You have changed how my people see humans. They respect strength, and you have shown them that strength comes in many forms." Over the following years, that respect grew. The Creventhi Empire opened its borders to the Coalition for the first time in centuries. Trade agreements were established. Cultural exchanges began. And at the center of it all was the story of Jake Morrison, the human who adopted a Creventhi prince and became clan to the Empire. Derek grew into a formidable warrior, trained in both Creventhi and human ways. He became a bridge between the two cultures, proof that,